Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to a very special episode. This is a chance for me to recommend a bunch of albums to you guys. Usually in this spot I do new music weekly, but I'm deciding to take the week off from it to do something a little bit special. I listen to a lot of music throughout the year, as is evidenced by my channel and all the reviews I put out and all the stuff I talk about on my New Music Weekly shows. So I'm always cataloging new music and trying to figure out what to feature here, and a lot of things get left by the wayside, and it's unfortunate, and I wish I could feature more bands and more great albums. So this is a chance for me to kind of catch up on all of the albums that I haven't talked about yet on the channel that I've been liking. I figure halfway through the year it's a good chance to do a little bit of a best of the rest sort of show of all of the albums that I haven't covered yet on the channel that I've really been loving, that I want to recommend. I'm going to just do it in alphabetical order by artist, give a quick 1-minute pitch of why I like the album and why you might like it and you should check it out. I'm going to put a list of all the albums in the description so it's easy to find, and I'm going to put a link to a Spotify playlist that has a track from each of these albums, with one exception that's not on Spotify. But beyond that, you can search them, try to find the band's Bandcamp or different places where you can purchase or listen to their music to support the artist, because that's what it's all about here. That's what I love to do, is promote great music and to support the artists and the great things that they're doing. So it's a diverse list of stuff going on here. I've been really trying to diversify my interests. I'm part of a group on Twitter with some fellow prog YouTubers that a lot of you are familiar with, and we recommend albums to each other, and I feel like I'm starting to adapt into some of their taste, adapt into a little bit of heavier style of music in some ways, adapting to a little bit of more indie rock kind of style. So I feel like it's an eclectic group. There's something here for everybody, and I'm excited to talk about some of these albums. So starting at number 1, the first album I'm going to talk about is Amplifier's Hologram. This is psychedelic space rock of a more modern, heavier edge from the United Kingdom, a Manchester-based group. They're compared a lot to Ocean Size, if that's a band that you like. It's a really cool group, and I almost feel like a grungy type sound to this album. It feels very modern and fresh and interesting, and I just really like their sound and what they're bringing to the table here. There's just a lot of cool influences. It's a fairly short album. It's only 36 minutes long, so it's easy to get through, and each track is interesting and has cool riffs, cool hooks to them. They just have a really great vibe. The sound is really fantastic on the record. So if you're into that more modern alternative type style, maybe a bit of psychedelia and space rock into that mixture, Amplifier is a cool band, and Hologram is a great record from them. So that's number 1. Number 2, I have a debut record from a band called the Anchoret. This album is called It All Began With Loneliness. This is progressive metal. I believe the members are from a variety of different places, but they come together here for a very cool progressive metal project that it's very heavy and intense at times. So if you're not really into the more intense metal stuff, this might be a little bit on the heavier side for you, but for me it works because it really combines some cool old school prog mentality to it, fusing the elements from almost jazz vibes with saxophone and flute solos, mellotrons, heavy riffs. It's just a cool soundscape that can please pretty much any fan of heavy music with prog leanings. Really cool track list. There's several tracks that range between like the 6 and 8 minute mark, and they do really well. An interesting feature on this album is Andy Tillison from The Tangent is the one doing keyboards and synthesizers. We've also got vocals by Sylvain Auclair, drums by James Christopher Noel, and guitar and lead guitar by Leo Estallas, and bass by Eduard Levitsky. So a really cool record. It's from Willowtip, is a record label that's really been putting out really great new, fresh, heavier, progressive music. They came out with a couple albums last year that were just really heralded. Perius was one that I particularly liked. Abstract Delusion is one that a lot of people like as well. So really cool label, really cool band, and this is one to watch. And it may be one, I meant to say this at the top of the show, but a lot of these you may see featured in more full fleshed out reviews later on in the channel. Just because I'm mentioning them here doesn't mean they're not going to get featured later, but I wanted to make sure to mention them so that they don't escape the radar and never get mentioned on the channel. So that's the second one I wanted to talk about. Third on my list is Anubis Gate and their album Interference. This is progressive metal from Denmark. This is a really cool group that plays almost a Neo-Prog inspired version of progressive metal. Yeah, there's heavier moments, but I think it fits right in the lane of bands like Arena, Frost, that type of thing. Maybe the heavier IQ moments even. So they do a really great job of blending that Neo-Prog style, but giving it a heavier bite and edge that just really fascinates and is really fun to listen to. They have some more heavier influences you can hear, like Iron Maiden, Queensryche, Fate's Warning, maybe even Dream Theater. You can hear all those influences here, but it really is done well in this progressive rock style with some really fun moments, some cool quirky bits that you wouldn't expect in certain tracks, some great almost theatrical vocals. It's just a really cool vibe and a really solid progressive metal album that I think many fans would love. Even if you're not into the more extreme, heavier side of the equation, I think this is a lot more palatable in that pretty broad spectrum of Dream Theater inspired progressive rock. So really fun there. Number 4 is going off on a different path a little bit. This is Avenged Sevenfold's Life is But a Dream, which Avenged Sevenfold is more of a typical standard metal band from the US. But here they do something a little bit different and create almost a progressive rock concept album of sorts. And sure, there's moments here that really lean into that more metallic sound that they're known for, especially on the first couple tracks like Game Over and Mattel. So if you're not into just the standard modern metal music, those tracks may just not really work for you. But as the track listing goes on, I feel like they get more interesting and more intricate and infuse different styles and sounds. And something like Cosmic wouldn't be out of place on a prog metal album. In fact, Beautiful Morning has almost Beach Boys inspired harmonies and really interesting layers to them. The final 3 proper tracks of the album, G, Ordinary, and Death, are just really out there and bizarre. G is like a fusion-y, Zappa-esque number. Ordinary and Death really lean into more jazzy elements, maybe even a little bit of like a theater vibe. And you get almost a classical outro with Life is But a Dream. So there's a whole smattering of stuff throughout this record that make it very interesting to me as a listener who loves prog music. I think it's divided fans quite a bit, but I really find it fascinating and interesting, and it's one of the best albums I've heard from this group. I wish the production values were a little bit better. I feel like the makes can feel a bit muddled and not really clear, so that's a little bit of a hang up for me. But beyond that, there's so much creative music going on here, I think it can be forgiven. So definitely one to look at. Number 5, I have Been the Future and their album Sounds So Wrong. This is crossover prog, but maybe flirting with jazz fusion from France. One of my favorite albums so far this year that I haven't covered yet on the channel. Really great sound to them. It's mostly instrumental. The opening and closing track are the main ones that have vocals to them, but all the tracks in between are pretty much pure instrumental. They dabble into this more jazzy lane, jazz fusion style. I feel like little quirks of like Steven Wilson inspired prog in there though in sections. So they have a good variety of sound, and it's just really clear and great production, and their instrumentation is fabulous. They have some incredible soloing that really works in that jazz style. And they're just a band to watch, just a really fun group, and it's an easy listen to get through. And I think it just improves as the record continues onward. Some of those later tracks are some of the best work from them on this album. So really enjoyable. If you like your jazz with your prog, I think this is definitely a contender to listen to. At number 6, I have Black Country New Roads live album, Live at Bush Hall. This is post-rock, math rock, post-punk, whatever you want to call it, from the UK. I usually don't include live albums in lists like this, but this is somewhat of an exception because this is all new material. They lost their main lead singer after their previous album, which I really enjoyed from last year, Ants From Up There. And so this was a chance for them to reinvent themselves a little bit, to come up with some new songs that would show a new direction for the band, and give the chance to other members to step up to the plate. There's a lot of different vocalists who come up to the plate to sing throughout the track list. And so the fact that it's a live album but features all new material makes me feel like you can classify it as a new album and fits in this list. But they're a really cool band that I've really fallen in love with. I really like this post-punk type scene. Black Midi is a part of it, as well as Squid, who I'll get to a little bit later. But it's a really fun new wave of prog music. You know, it's doing something quirky and different, but sounding very modern and fresh. It's not taking tropes from old-fashioned 70s prog. It's really bringing things into a new era. To me, this is kind of the future of what prog can be. And there's just some really fun, interesting tracks on here. Nothing too heavy, nothing too real crazy, but some great female-led vocals in certain sections are some of my favorite works. But also, of course, you get some male vocals as well. Turbine Pigs is one of my favorite tracks from the year. Just a really expansive track that almost stretches to 10 minutes. Really interesting playing, and they're just a really cool band to watch. At number 7, I have an EP, Dirt Poor Robin's Prelude to Firebird. Once again, not really totally classified as progressive rock, I would say. Maybe more of a cinematic rock. But they play in a style that's similar to something like The Deer Hunter, I hear them compared to. But this album in particular, it's short. It's only 4 tracks. It's foreshadowing a full-length album which should be coming later this year, which is partly why I didn't spotlight it, even though I absolutely adore this EP. I plan to cover the entire record when it drops later in fall, but this is a great teaser for what to expect. There's just some wonderful playing here. They can get into a bit more of a poppier vibe in sections like To the Heights, which I think is a fantastic song that I wish was world famous. You know, they deserve more popularity for tracks like this, but you get a lot of that, you know, orchestration and beautiful opera-esque singing at times. You know, they're a little bit throwbacky. They have these really lush arrangements, but they also know how to rock and how to have really a lot of fun and great catchy choruses and melodies. Definitely highly recommended for anyone who likes a lot of the bands like Deer Hunter and, you know, the more modern bands with a poppy tinge but still retain some progressive spirit. I think they're amongst the best. At number 8, we have Dispirited Spirits and the album The Redshift Blues, crossover prog from Portugal, in fact. This is music from Indigo Diaz. This is a really cool album. I've heard it's described as an emo album, but with little bits of jazz, little bits of prog, little bits of maybe math rock and things like that into the forefront. So it's just a really cool, breezy, vibey listen. It's very emotional music. It's very, you know, could be considered a little bit dark and sad, but it's really played expertly. It's a fun listen. I really like the jazzy elements that are brought to the forefront. It sounds really crisp and clear, and it's a really fun, rising new young talent that we've got to listen to here. So it's a really fun album to get through. It's fairly short and compact, but it really packs a punch and was one that stood out to me upon its release. At number 9, we've got Dominic Sanderson's Impermanence. This is eclectic prog from the UK. A lot of elements here. This is one that I've heard a lot of praise for, a lot of people really like, and I had this really high up in my rankings and really loved it. The only thing that draws it back for me is a little bit of not as good production. You know, I feel like this is an artist that has some maturing to do, and especially in the recording, and, you know, it's a very independent release, and maybe that adds to its charm, but for me it took away from it just slightly. But putting that aside, the music itself is just really expertly crafted, and you can hear little bits from all of the prog heroes of this era of, you know, Steven Wilson in there, some King Crimson vibes, Wobbler, Engelgard, you know, things like that. There's a lot of cool musical DNA and influence in this. I think most people are looking towards Steven Wilson as one of the biggest influences here. You could hear a bit of like his Raven, Hand Cannot Erase period baked into this release, but it's just really well done. There's some shorter, more balladesque tracks, there's some heavier moments, there's some more experimental things, you know, but everything feels like it has a dark tinge to it. There's some really cool vocal layering and moments also. It's just a really eclectic grab bag of some interesting stuff for fans of classic progressive rock with a modern tinge. I think you can't go wrong listening to this. All right, at number 10, we've got Enoch Root and their album Delusion. This is crossover prog from the US. Of course, a heavy Deer Hunter influence here, but you could also hear little bits, perhaps, of like Haken in that mix, maybe a bit of Porcupine Tree. This is the project of multi-instrumentalist and songwriter Rhys Ortenberg. And it's a concept album that has a really cool flow to it. My only negative criticism could be that it leans a little bit heavy into that Deer Hunter sound. There's parts of it that almost sound exactly like they came from early Axe records from Deer Hunter, so that's a little bit of a thing. And, it could feel a bit samey vibe throughout the run of the track list, but when that tracks hit, they hit hard for me, and I love the Deer Hunter sound, so anything that sounds similar to it, I'm already on board. So it really grabbed me. It really was something that grabbed my ear and made me perk up attention, and so I think it's a strong album to check out if you're a fan of the Deer Hunter or, more modern alternative take on prog music. It's just really great record, and even though I said it feels samey, I think at the same time it works to its favor because it feels very cohesive and like one singular piece. So I really like this album. I think it's well worth checking out. Number 11, we've got another EP, this time from Exploring Birdsong, and their EP Dancing in the Face of Danger. This is crossover prog from the United Kingdom, from Liverpool in fact, and they're one of my favorite new groups. They haven't really released a total full-length album. They've released a couple EPs at this point in their career, but they're fantastic. Really well worth checking out. You could hear a lot of influences. It's really piano-based progressive music. I don't believe they use guitars in their mixture here. It has incredible female vocals, which are really sublime and raise this to new heights. They have a poppy sensibility at times, so the songs are catchy and have great hooks, but there's definitely some more modern tinged progressive rock in the mixture as well. So it's a really great, satisfying listen all the way through. It's short, so it's easy to get through, but there's so much great stuff on board. I think anyone could find something to enjoy here. Just really great songcraft, really great singing and performances, and great instrumental work. So everything you could ask for from great progressive rock is on board this release. At number 12, I have an interesting album, Eyeless Owl, and their album Murmurations. This is, perhaps you could call it math rock, but I feel like there's a lot of different things baked into the style, some avant-garde, jazzy, symphonic, eclectic prog in the makes here. This is from Quinn Conigulero. This is a really cool instrumental release that brought to mind, like, Gentle Giant type vibes to it, Canterbury type style at times, jazzy type prog as well. It just breezes through really easily, and it's just a fun listen that harkens back to the classic era of progressive rock, and you could hear a whole bunch of great influences: symphonic prog, ambient, samba, jazz, just all these different things baked in to make for a fun, exciting, breezy listen that I really enjoyed all the way through. A great instrumental album. I haven't really been keen on instrumental albums in my history. I like Liquid Tension Experiment. That's pretty much the extent of it. But this year I've been really enjoying a lot of instrumental music, and that's one that really stood out to me. On a different note, we've got at number 13 Geese and their album 3D Country. And this is harkening back to what I was talking about with Black Country New Roads, that somewhat post-punk type scene, but this is done in a totally different way. It has that baked into it, that post-punk type art rock style, but I feel like they infuse it with a bit of country music, southern rock, maybe a bit of pop elements to it as well, some 70s style singer-songwriter type things, but it creates a really fascinating eclectic stew of things that I really found myself grooving to. And it's just catchy and a fun record. There's little stabs of little, like, more harsh elements like you'd expect from something like Black Midi, but for the most part, it's pretty catchy, pretty easy to digest, and has a lot of great melodies and breezy moments, and the singer does a really good job. I feel like a lot of these post-punk bands get into this like talk singing kind of vibe, similar to Black Midi and Black Country New Road, but I feel like he has a bit more melody to his voice and does a lot of different things throughout the track list. So it's a really cool release if you like that more modern scene, that post-punk, but you're looking for a bit more melody and maybe a throwback 70s southern rock, classic rock vibe. I think this is a fun one to check out. I thought of it as like, what if Rolling Stones was more of a prog band that they might sound a bit like this and at points, but there's a lot of variety, so you can't really blanket statement this with any sort of description. Number 14, another mostly instrumental album. This is Grant the Sun and their album Voyage, more experimental post-metal from Norway. This is outside of my usual typical lane because it's very heavy and intense and very dense in its sound, but I just found it very soothing and a great journey and vibe to it. Sometimes this post-metal, it's heavy music when you take it at its core, but for some reason the way they're able to manipulate it, it makes it more into this journey feel, this soothing vibe, this really easy breezy version of metal. And there's little bits of vocals, but they're really buried way back in the mix. And sometimes there's little bits of growling, sometimes it's more melodic singing, but mostly you're focused on the instrumental work. And that really works for me because, as is well documented on the channel, I don't really like the harsh vocals. And so when it's buried deeper in the background, it isn't as noticeable and isn't as distracting to the music at the forefront. So this is a really cool vibe, and I was really enjoying it on my listen through. Maybe I was just in the right mood for it when I listened through it the first time, and it since has continued to grab me. Very short listen, but well worth your time if you like that post-metal type sound. Then we've got at number 15, another instrumental album. This is Hackberry and their album Breathing Space, heavy prog from the Netherlands. This is a fantastic release recommended to me by my crew. Really happy to have listened to this. Definitely takes inspiration from all of the modern prog that you would expect, Opeth, Porcupine Tree, and just molds it and morphs it into this incredible stew of musical excellence. They're really great players, really great melodies here, really great riffs, and it just continues forward. It's 4 tracks, they're all fairly lengthy, and they all have their moments, and they're all just fun to listen to with really cool guitar solos, Hammond organ, mellotron, groovy rhythms. They just have it all and move from one musical landscape to the next. It's pretty seamlessly, and it's just an enjoyable album to continue to listen to with that Opeth, Porcupine Tree, Dream Theater, Haken vibe that a lot of these bands are going for nowadays that I really enjoy. So that's a good one. At number 16, I have HMLTD and The Worm. This is art rock from the UK. Really fascinating release. Once again, we get back into that more post-punk type style that you hear. I feel like there's a bit of Black MIDI, especially in the track Wormlands at the beginning. You hear a little bit of that chaotic nature and craziness. But this is a concept record that goes through a lot of different movements and moods in the piece, based on a loose concept about an anachronistic version of medieval England. It's populace in peril because the titular worm is bound to swallow them. So it's a really fascinating record with a really interesting concept and a lot of different things going on in the soundscape. There's some jazziness, there's some cool piano vibes, there's moments that are more stripped back and more ballad-esque. There's some musical theater almost type moments on this as well. I've heard comparisons being made to like Pink Floyd's The Wall in the more theatrical moments, and I think that's apt. So it's a really cool vibe of a record that goes through so many different styles and moods. I think it's definitely worth some listening to, see if it's your thing. But it is a pretty eclectic and pretty out there. Might be a little bit weird for some people, but I really connected with it and think it's a really fascinating record. Number 17, I have Hrada and Mirland. This is crossover prog from Norway. It's the vision of Extol frontman Peter Espevol and filmmaker-musician Asmund Genoy. Really a beautiful record. I just fell in love with this because it just has so much melody, a folky vibe to it at times. It has these great vocal harmonies that blend together fantastically. It's very laid back. It's very dreamy in its style. There's nothing too heavy. There's nothing too aggressive or in your face. It's all very breezy and flows past you. It's a great ride and great to listen to when you want to just lay back and let something wash over you. I get a little bit of vibes of like Reign of Kindo, perhaps in this mixture. Maybe some of those more dreamy moments of Deer Hunter also. There's some elements of pop, classical, folk, jazz. All of that is built into this space. Great melodies, great vocal harmonies, just really rich and really great atmosphere. And they have these just cool orchestrated swells and things that just really... There's even some instrumental tracks spread throughout that are more orchestral and bridge builders to the next track. So I really enjoy the vibe of this, and it's been one that has been working for me throughout this past few months. At number 18, I have Kimono and the album Mind Out of Mind, Neo-Prog from the US. They're from Minneapolis, in fact. And this is a great Neo-Prog album. If you're looking more for that traditional prog style, this is probably where you should gravitate towards. Really fun, and they infuse a lot of cool, funky elements to some of the tracks, some popular elements, some 70s style stuff going on here, but definitely keeping the prog at the forefront. You know, you hear bands like Yes and Pink Floyd. Even more modern, I hear a little bit of Wobbler, especially in the opening track, Mind Out of Mind, but there's just so much going on here. They do an expert job of paying homage to the classics, but also really forging forward with their own sound, and I think it just created a really great blend of stuff that definitely an underrated record that prog people need to go check out, so that's a great one. Number 19, I have Karmic Juggernaut and their album Phantasmagoria. To me, this is more jazz fusion. Maybe it could be called Rio Avant-Garde Prog. This is from the US. It brings to mind bands like Thank You Scientist and their more chaotic elements at times. Frank Zappa, perhaps, is another reference point, but it's very much in that jazzier, kind of messy type vein. You know, there's some really cool moments that showcase all the instrumentation. There's some horns that are definitely featured throughout the piece. There's some flute, some really cool vocals, but at times they can almost delve into the style that sounds a little bit like Yes, maybe at their more chaotic moments, like the opening of Close to the Edge or parts of Gates of Delirium or Sound Chaser, you know, but they have that vibe to them as well. They feel like this kind of classic sounding band, but brought into a modern era with these jazz fusion-y elements. This is one of my favorite records also of the year, and very likely to get a spotlight at some time in the future, but I wanted to mention it here so it didn't get forgotten. This is a great record that I think everyone could enjoy. If you like that more jazz fusion-y side of the prog spectrum, if you like Frank Zappa and his quirkiness, I think there's a lot of quirky elements here, and it's a lot of fun to listen to, and it's a pretty short album, easy to get through, and a really great time. So really love that one. At number 20, I have Klone and their album Meanwhile. This is heavy prog from France, delving almost into metal style music. You could really hear influences from Tool, from Opeth, you know, Porcupine Tree, Devin Townsend, those types of influences. Tool is probably the biggest reference point in my eyes. Very melodic, has this dark, heavy vibe, but it's never overwhelming. It's never too intense for me. And they have a great sense for melody, some great choruses, some great sounds, and just a really great overall vibe. I just really enjoy what they're doing here, and I think this record showcases some of the best of their abilities. So a band to watch that just keeps rising in this progressive metal, heavy prog type genre. I think they have a bright future ahead, a really great album. Moving away from a lot of the prog stuff, this is maybe more in a power pop, you know, just classic rock type vibe, indie rock. This is the Lemon Twigs and their album Everything Harmony, American rock band from Long Island, New York, founded by brothers Brian and Michael Daddario. A really fantastic throwback type record, you know, harkening back to the best of the Beach Boys and the Beatles and early 70s rock and soft rock. It's really a delightful listen. They have a great sense for melody, almost harkening back to like the Pet Sounds era of Beach Boys. Just a really beautiful listen that I wanted to highlight at this spot. Just, you know, it's hard to deny the catchiness, the musicality, really great sounds, and definitely a good recommendation if you just want more of a classic rock, classic pop type record and need a break from all the crazy prog heaviness and chaotic nature that can bring. This is a really nice palate cleanser that I was enjoying. Back into the prog though, we've got M-Opus and At the Mercy of Manannan. This is symphonic prog from Ireland, and this is an interesting band because they basically pick a year in classic progressive rock and do an album as if it came out from that year, and this one is basically crafted to sound like it came from 1972. It's the perfect length for that. It's 41 minutes long. And it just goes through so many different cool movements. It's a concept album, and you could just hear the classic 70s prog vibes bleeding through. But to me, I think they really set themselves apart by having their own unique sound as well that they add into it that makes for a really fun time. And I think it's a really great album that has some instrumental cool moments. There's a lot of great melody to it. I feel like not just prog, but just classic early 1970s, classic rock and pop vibes are also on this thing as well. So really great album. Definitely recommended if you're looking more for that classic symphonic prog type style. I feel like I'm featuring a lot of more heavy, intense things or art rock, kind of weird, quirky things. So this is a cool, just straight ahead prog album that I think many people could enjoy. Number 23, I have Motorpsycho's Yay, which came out fairly recently. This is eclectic prog from Norway. This is a band I've been only recently getting into. I liked their release. I believe it came out last year, Ancient Astronauts. This is a totally different style of album, though. This is more singer-songwriter, more acoustic, some great folk songs, perhaps. There is a Hotel de Dallas, I feel like, is more in that Ancient Astronauts, more proggy vein. There's just some Pink Floyd elements, and it's really expansive and has some great elements to it. But most of the tracks stay more in a singer-songwriter acoustic vein. But once again, another cool palette cleanser, and I think it works really well for what they're going for. And so an easy recommendation for fans of Motorpsycho and fans of just more laid-back acoustic works, but with still some interesting sprinklings of psychedelia and prog. So really fun, really good record. This is a highlight for me, and this will certainly be reviewed in the near future, but I wanted to mention it as one of my favorites that I haven't talked about yet. This is Nospun and their album Opus. This is my number 24 pick. This is progressive metal from the United States. I just discovered this a few weeks ago, and it's blowing my mind. This is just one of my favorite records of the year, creeping up its way into my top 10, top smattering of records of my favorite stuff this year. Really, it's like what you would get if you mixed in a blender Haken's Visions and maybe Dream Theater's Metropolis Part 2. You get this really fascinating concept record that's along similar lines, storyline-wise, but really branches itself out in all these quirky, crazy directions that are so much fun. If you like Haken, this is a no-brainer. You have to listen to this, I'd say. If you like classic Haken music, I think this is the album that people were wanting Fauna to be. As much as I love Haken's Fauna and think it's just one of their best records, I think a lot of people were hoping it was harkening back to their classic sound and being more traditional proggy, like what their early records were like. This is what that is. This has that early quirky proggy sound, and there's so many cool instrumental moments that go off into crazy different directions, and I'm going to talk about it in a lot more depth in the future, so I'm not going to talk more now, but check it out. This is a strong 100% recommendation. Really cool album that I hope will just keep gathering more support and more acclaim and more attention. At number 25, I have the Oceans album Holocene. This is experimental post-metal from Germany. Just a really cool vibe to this one. Once again, if you're a little bit opposed to the heavier growling vocals and stuff, there's definitely some of that here. But if you know my taste, if I'm recommending it, it's not going to be super overwhelming and have heavy growling vocals the entire time. I think this album has a good balance and blend of more atmospheric metal type stuff where there's more melodious singing. There's even a female vocal during Unconformities that I really like before it hits hard into that heavier, more aggressive style. But I think it's balanced well. They do a great job with this post-metal style. And I know there's people who are just such big fans of their work. I haven't really delved too far into their back catalog, but I heard some of my contemporaries really praising this album, so I wanted to give it a listen, and I really enjoyed it. Thought it was a great vibe. I always find it interesting, these bands that have this metal sound, but are able to morph it into this more atmospheric style where it doesn't sound overwhelming and aggressive. It sounds more like you're taking a journey and you can almost relax and meditate to parts of this album. But it's a really fascinating listen, a great German band that is really making their mark in this scene, one of the forefront pioneers of this sound of music, I think, and it's really fantastic. Number 26, another EP. This is the one that's not on streaming. This is Pendragon's North Star, Neo-Prog from the UK, of course. This is Nick Barrett's project. Some great tracks here. To me, this is like a companion piece to Love Over Fear, which came out in 2020 and was one of my favorite, if not the favorite record from that year. I just really love their sound on that record. Just really acoustic and folky and beautiful, but never losing that symphonic prog touch. And this just has that in spades also. Just a great 3-part track of North Star and then final track of Fall Away. All beautifully composed, just really heartfelt, and you can feel the vibes, the love. It's just a beautiful piece of music. Great pastoral prog. Just really fun to listen to and just easy to take you away and take you to another place. It's just a really beautiful record that I think people who are especially fans of Pendragon, just a no-brainer listen, and a great record. Number 27, I have Redemption's I Am the Storm, progressive metal from the US, of course. Not much to say here, but it's just them doing what they do best, just standard progressive metal stuff in the vein of Fate's Warning and Dream Theater and Symphony X and all of the classics. They really are carrying the torch forward in that style, and there's some incredible instrumental moments where they're just playing these crazy solos. You get keyboards playing off of guitars, and it's just fantastic. There's a couple of cool epic length tracks here. They do a cover of Turn It On Again by Genesis, which is really interesting. Not sure if it totally works, really, but it's fun to hear it here. You get a little bit of that smile on your face to hear a familiar track like that, just popping up in the middle of the track listing for some reason. There's also a cover of Red Rain from Peter Gabriel at the end also. So really interesting album. I think it's just solid progressive metal. Just if you really love that style, this is somewhat of a no-brainer choice as well. Number 28, I have Ring of Gyge's Metamorphosis. This is progressive metal from Iceland. Really great stuff here. This is an easy one to listen to if you're not too into the heavy metal. Maybe there's little touchstones and little moments of more aggressive vocals, but the majority of the record to me is a lot more melodic and really flirts with different areas of lighter prog at times. Even though they're willing to get more into the heavier sections throughout the record also. You can hear touchstones of Leprous and Haken and all that stuff, but you hear some classic 70s influences, some Neo-Prog stylings. And I really like the lead singer's vocals. I think it's really sounding great. There's an epic length track called The Face of God, which is really good. Maybe that's where they take most of their Haken influences and put them into that track. But it's a really great listen, a breezy listen through. I don't think there's anything too overtly harsh for those who don't like the more harder metal sound. I think this is a good one that's more melodious and easy to listen to, but still has a lot of intricate and interesting musicianship. So really good album there. Next, we've got Squid and their album Oh Monolith, going back to that post-rock, post-punk kind of style sound. I really found a lot to enjoy with this record. It's a really cool listen through with some eclectic pieces. They go through a lot of different sections. Sometimes it can get a little bit harsh and intense for my ears, but they settle back into a groove, and then they settle into a more melodic section, and I'm able to get through it. It reminds me of how I felt about Hellfire from Black Midi last year, which ended up high on my list. I think it was even in my top 16. But it's not always an easy listen of this type of music for me, and I'm still trying to adapt and trying to understand it, but I think there's a lot to enjoy here, a lot of great post-punk, post-rock, math rock kind of stuff to enjoy. Some really eclectic and interesting instrumentation and sound styles. I think it's definitely something to enjoy if you're a fan of this style of music. And finally, Witch Ripper, The Flight After the Fall, experimental post-metal from the US. Definitely has a vibe and it sounds similar to like Mastodon or Baroness, this more heavy metal type style. There's aggressive vocals throughout, so if you're not a fan of the more aggressive style, this might be one to steer clear of. But for me, it didn't take away from the coolness of the rest of the album. And I think they're able to sprinkle in a little bit of other influences, like you hear maybe some Queen or David Bowie or some of those classic 70s, almost glam metal style coming into the forefront here to break up the more heavy Mastodon type sound. It's very close to Mastodon, so if you're a fan of Mastodon, you're probably going to find something to enjoy here, is my takeaway. And I enjoyed my listen through of this, even though I'm not a huge Mastodon fan and I don't care for a lot of the more heavier, aggressive style sections. I think overall it worked for me and is a recommendation. So there you have it, a long list of recommendations. Sorry for the long episode, but I wanted to really talk through some of these great albums and catch up on the things that I've missed and haven't been able to talk about yet on the channel. Like I said, some of these may feature in more at-length reviews in the near future. I reserve the right to feature these in more depth later on the channel, but I just want to make sure that some of these fabulous records don't get left behind. And if you're looking for good new music, this is a great place to look for it. So thank you guys for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed my rundown of some of these albums. Let me know in the comments some of the forgotten albums that you've enjoyed throughout this year. If there's albums that you were expecting to see on this list or you're surprised I haven't talked about, it's either because I just haven't found the time to get to them yet and they're in my list, or I just haven't heard of them, or they just didn't grab me quite the same way, which is just, my own preferences and tastes. Sometimes I listen to an album and it just doesn't move me, and so I don't really cover it on the channel in that regard. So I only really cover stuff that I really love, that really speaks to me. So thank you guys again, and I hope to catch you guys in a future episode. Bye everybody. Enjoy.